Hey, welcome back to my channel as we start to explore what do we know with near 100% certainty. Hey, I'm Kolan Wright, and this is The Search for God. So, what can we know with near 100% certainty? If I look at this leaf and say, this is a green leaf. I've just made a declaration to the world about what I see, what I think, what I believe. Now, there's a lot of nuance in here. You can see there's a little color in there. It's not all green. But I still made this declaration. When we make a declaration, we're saying something about what we think reality is. But is there anything we can know with near 100% certainty? I talked with you about these things in my previous video. So there's 6 primary things we're going to use in our search for God. And as you can see here, we have the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, which are philosophy terms. So you're going to group these together. There's the law of mathematics, which we use for a lot of science. There's also what we're going to call the laws from experience. And we're going to talk about this primarily in the issue as it relates to death. And then lastly, we have the law of causality. These are the laws I want to expound on and explain a little bit more. Now, each of these words have a definition. When I say the leaf is green, when I say the law of identity, each one of those have a definition to them. Words have meaning. But the meaning that we come up with for each of these words is based on some assigned value that we place on the word. In Japanese, they're going to use a different word. In Korea, the word is going to be different. But we are still talking about the same type of reality. We're still talking about the same thing. We're still talking about this green leaf with little hues of red. And if we come to a definition of a word, it explains something about reality. Let's go on to our first law, the law of identity. What does that mean? It means when I take this leaf has certain identifying features, which separates it from this leaf. They're not the same. This one has a specific identity that we can then define with all of the different nuances to this leaf. And this leaf has very similar characteristics in cellular structure, in what its usefulness is, but it comes off of a different tree and it's at a different stage in its life. And we'll talk more about the idea of change as it relates to identity later. But let's just focus on identity for a moment. So we know that A is A. This leaf is this leaf. Now, if that seems silly to you, it's been thousands of years of philosophy understanding this idea of identity. How do we identify something? How do we categorize something? And the difficulty here is that we know that we don't know 100% of something, but we also know that identity is true. When we ascribe something to this, we may make some words about it. We may use the word green or red or leaf to describe it, but its identity is a unique identity. I have a unique identity. You have a unique identity. We don't know everything about ourselves though, right? And in my previous video, when I went through the book, I talked about we don't know what our current blood pressure is, and we might not know what our current blood potassium level is. We don't know everything about ourselves, and we don't know everything about this leaf, but that does not rid it of its identity. That doesn't rid you of your identity, and it doesn't rid me of my identity just because we don't know everything about it. It has a 100% true identity, even if we don't know what that is. That is the law of identity. And our struggle is, and what we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to understand that reality. We're trying to understand ultimate reality, 100% of everything around us. And in our search for God, we're trying to understand who God is, what the nature of God is. And our struggle is, what do we know with 100% certainty? We know the law of identity is 100% true, but the things that we identify, we know that's where we struggle. That's where we don't necessarily know everything about that, but the law itself is what is 100% true. And so, how do we know that? We know that through, again, let's take our leaf. And as I explained previously, 1,000 years ago, people identified leaves by their shape, what tree they came from. But now we identify leaves based on their species. I mean, we can go out and determine the DNA structure of these leaves. But that doesn't mean the information wasn't there previously. It's not like something like, oh, we discovered DNA. It wasn't there 1,000 years ago. No, the DNA was there 1,000 years ago. We just didn't know how to access it. And so when we're trying to identify something, we know we're going to have limitations. We know that we're not going to have 100% of the information about that. And so again, when is going to be enough? But the law of identity is what's 100% true. So how does this apply to God? Well, you are you. I am me. Colon is colon. God is God. God is going to have certain definitions about himself, herself, whatever God is. So the question becomes do we put those definitions upon God, or are God's definitions independent of what we ascribe to God? And I think you can really quickly see that God is going to be who he is, she is, however you want to use that term, as we're going through this search. Just like I have certain reality about myself and you have certain reality about yourself, no matter what I might think of you or you might think of me, the definition of who I am, of who you are, doesn't matter what somebody else says about you or what somebody else says about me. That reality is there. That identity is 100% true. That identity is the reality. And we'll talk about the reality of change, like I mentioned before, in some additional video. Because change is a part of our identity. The question is change a part of God's identity, or is God unchanging? So that'll be a topic for another time. That'll be a fun one. So now let's move on to our second 100% true law. And this is the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction basically states that A cannot equal non-A. This leaf cannot be this not this leaf. You can't say this is a leaf and this is not a leaf at the same time and in the same relationship. R.C. Sproul, one of my favorite authors and speakers, has this example where you're driving down a road, you get to a stop sign, and you look over, and you see a car coming down the road, or you don't see a car. There either is a car or there's not a car. There can't both be a car and not a car at the same time, in the same relationship, and in the same space. There's either a big car barreling down at you, and you better stop, or there's not one there. There's either a police officer on the corner clocking your speed, or there's not a police officer. There can't both be a police officer and not a police officer at the same time, the same space, same relationship, at the same moment. And that's what we're talking about. People will want to split hairs about this, and they will talk about quantum mechanics and quantum physics. But in reality, as we live our lives, as we understand our senses, as we understand this space that we live in, there's either a camera in front of me or there's not a camera in front of me. But that is the law of non-contradiction. In the law of identity, we're trying to build a consensus about what this leaf is. We're trying to understand everything about it. But in the law of non-contradiction, we're saying what it is or it is not. It separates it from something else. So this becomes a challenge in society because we have to come to the agreement of definitions. And that's where one of the challenges is. I don't want to get political, but right now in the American culture, there's a question of what is a woman? There's a definition that certain people have, and other people say that's not the definition. And those two things come into direct conflict. What is a woman? What is the unique identity that we ascribe to that word? This, I would say, is a microphone. What is the unique identity that we ascribe to this microphone? When we talk about hair, there's certain identity that we put with it. If I say, this is not hair, this is not a microphone, we get into a debate. We argue, we clash, because everything is based on its identity. We need to know what something is. We want to understand the reality. And then we have to decide on how and what words we ascribe to that reality. So we can name this something else. We can call this Bumblebot. I don't know. So these are the new things. We're going to call these Bumblebots. And remember when I did the video before, we called these things STEMmy things or veiny things. Yeah, that was the veiny things, right? So I'm trying to change the wording that we use. And if everyone agrees that the new word is veiny things and everyone agrees that the new things are Bumblebots, well then Bumblebots become the new term for hair that we use because it's based on identity. But it doesn't change the fact of what this substance is, what we call hair. It doesn't change the fact of what these are. Those words are just representational definitions that we use to understand the world around us. So, non-contradiction comes into play to say, if I change this wording to veiny thing, then they're either veiny things or they're not veiny things. This is either a Bumblebot or not a Bumblebot. The definition that we ascribe to it doesn't change its identity. And then once we define what it is, then it either is that thing or it's not that thing. It can't be it and not it at the same time and in the same relationship. So hopefully this is making sense. Hopefully you're following along. So the law of non-contradiction is another 100% law that's based on identity and the conceptual definitions that we put upon things, but the thing itself has a reality and has its own definition. And it is either that thing or it's not that thing. It can't be both this leaf and not this leaf at the same moment, the same time as I'm showing it to you. That's the law of non-contradiction. Applying the law of non-contradiction to God. So we would say, in this type of situation, God cannot be all-knowing and not all-knowing at the same time and in the same relationship. People fight wars over the identity of things and the idea of contradictions when we disagree over the identity of something. Now, there's a third law, the law of the excluded middle. The law of the excluded middle is something we're also going to use very frequently in our search for God. The law of the excluded middle is also based on the law of identity. Either this is a leaf or it's not a leaf. Either this is a microphone or it's not a microphone. The law of non-contradiction says this cannot be a microphone and not a microphone at the same time and in the same relationship. The law of the excluded middle says either this is a microphone or it's not a microphone. The law of the excluded middle also depends on identity. So when we identify something, then we say it is either that identity or it's not that identity. Either this is a dead brown maple leaf or it's not a dead brown maple leaf. And each time we put one more word to it, we make the identity more specific. So the idea of the law of the excluded middle is once we identify something, it is either itself or it's not itself. Either I am colon or I am not colon. That is the law of the excluded middle. Whereas the law of non-contradiction would be I can't be colon and not colon at the same time in the same relationship. The law of the excluded middle is vitally important. We will use this very frequently when we search for God. So how are we going to use this in our search for God? Either God has all knowledge or God does not have all knowledge. In the search for God, these facts of omnipotence, these facts of having all power, all knowledge, are a huge hurdle, because that basically means if God has anything less than all knowledge or anything less than all power, then he doesn't have that. He doesn't have all knowledge or all power if there's anything less. And that's going to be vitally important in terms of how we look and how we find and define who God is and what the religions say about who God is. These are all based on the law of identity. So to recap, we have three primary philosophical laws. The law of identity, which is a consensus on what we know about an object's nature, and we understand that we don't have 100% knowledge about these. That's what makes the law of identity so challenging, and why identifying and correctly defining words are so important. The second one is based on the law of identity, which is the law of non-contradiction. This is where two statements come into direct conflict. God cannot be all-knowing and not all-knowing in the same time, the same relationship, in the same space. The law of the excluded middle is where we look at an object and the object is either itself or not itself, and there's no middle ground. Now, some situations there can be middle ground, but as we start to define things, we have to be very careful in how we look and how we define certain things so that we're not dealing with some middle ground. And the omnis of God, the omnis of all-knowing, all-powerful, and all omnipresent, being everywhere, those lend themselves really well to the law of the excluded middle. Because if there's anything less than everything, God doesn't have that. He doesn't have that ability. Those are actually going to be really helpful and challenging at the same time. So hopefully I haven't confused you too much at this point as we go through. And we're going to argue over definitions. We're going to argue over the identity of things in certain words. If you have an issue, please comment below. The fourth and final law of logic that we're just going to kind of lightly use through this search for God is just the law of mathematics. Science is one of the most important things in this world, in my life. Science would be lost without mathematics. The economy would be lost without consistent mathematics. There'd be no accounting, finance, bookkeeping. We'd struggle. We use math every day. We may not use algebra or calculus in most everyday lives, but every time you go grocery shopping, things have a price to them and they have to add up to something. People would be distraught if they bought two $10 items and the total came to $300. How did that happen? That doesn't make any mathematical sense. In simple addition and subtraction, I bought 2 rolls of toilet paper. I hope toilet paper is not $10 a roll. But that's 2 of them, and they're $10 each, and now it's $300, right? So mathematics, consistent, quantifiable, 100% true, with proofs, signs. I'm not going to go into it here. That's just one of the other 6 laws that's 100% true. Now, those last 4 laws are 100% true, and I call laws of logic. You can rationally deduce these concepts. These next two, though, I call laws from experience. We can't logically deduce them. We can't just figure them out by getting some paper or thinking deeply about them. We have to experience these things to understand them. The first one that I want to cover is basically called the law of death. I mean, we all know that we're all going to die. I found this out very early when I was 5 years old and my first grandfather died. I really didn't understand death at that point. When my second grandfather died when I was 9, 10, definitely understood things a little bit better then. And it's impacted me in my entire life. It's always been in the back of my mind. When are these things going to happen? And since that time, my father and my mother have both passed away. They've both physically died. Now, people may want to argue and disagree and say, well, their spirits live on, their souls live on. Well, do we have proof of that? Can we say that that's a 100% certainty? We've experienced it. We can't logically deduce it. We can't even logically deduce death. And the number of people we have, we cannot say that our soul goes on 100% accurately. We can see physical death, and we see that every day. And there's no one living on the earth. There's no one here, like they've been here from the beginning, right? They are 6,000 years old. They've never died. We don't have anyone like that. Every single person that we know of from history has died. And we expect every single person in this world is going to die. Can I prove that I'm going to die? Can I prove that you're going to die? I can't. I can't logically prove that. But our experience tells me it's going to happen. People don't like to talk about it. I don't like talking about it. But it's just a reality. It's something we need to understand. This is also going to impact, and this is one of the reasons I began my search for God. Maybe that's not the reason that you began your search for God. But it's vitally important because we're going to cover one of the questions that I think God should have to answer is, why do we die? That should be a very clear answer because this isn't something I experience. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I have this sense of eternity. I have this sense that I should be able to go on, that I should be able to continue to live, but experience doesn't tell me that. Logic doesn't tell me that. It's just a feeling that I have. And I know a lot of people out there have that feeling. But the law of death is 100% true based on experience. Finally, our last 6 laws, that's 100% true. The law of causality. Now, some people may not know what that is. It's basically cause and effect. It's for every effect, there's a cause. Me lifting up this leaf is the effect. Me waving it is the effect. The cause is my hand moving up and down. The cause of my hand moving up and down is my signals from my muscles and up through my brain. And the reason my brain decides to do it is because I want to show you cause and effect. And the reason I want to show you cause and effect, and we go back and back and back, and there's cause to each thing that goes back and back. There's a cause, there's a reason that I'm here doing this video right now. The effect is the video that's getting made, but the cause, and there's multiple causes behind it. The time of night that I was able to do it. There's all these things that transpired. Why did I want to do it? Why did I write? All of these causes. The law of cause and effect is 100% true. And we can go back and back and back, and we understand. I have parents. My parents had parents. We expect that they had parents. I've never met them. Did I meet them? I might have met them. Yeah, probably did. But their great-great-grandparents, I never met. The ones born in the 1800s or 1700s, the ones that I have on my little genealogy thing, I never met them. There's some name on paper. But they are the cause, and I am one of those effects. So this is not something that we can deduce logically. Now, there's logic in it. So like I showed a picture of billiard balls, one of my favorite things when I was a kid. I loved slamming the balls taking the white ball and sliding into the billiard balls and love to see them explode. Now, I didn't use a cue stick. I just used my hand because I wasn't very adept at using the cue stick. But I would slam them in and I would see all these effects. And you try to get the angle just right so that you can knock it into the corner or knock it this way or run it into something else. And you understand that there's some angle that goes on, there's some degree of force, and we can measure those things. We can look at all of those things and calculate them. So there's logic behind cause and effect. But the overall idea of cause and effect is something we learn from experience. Now, we can also learn it through experimentation. We understand that when we undertake an experiment, we are choosing certain inputs and we expect certain effects, certain things to happen. Sometimes we run the experiment because we don't know what will happen. I imagine the first person who had gunpowder and said, let me see what this will do. Whoa, didn't expect that to happen. Maybe they did. But there's certain effects that are preceded by a cause. And what we try to do is we try to figure out, hey, can we make changes to the future? And by saving money, we are doing a cause now that's trying to affect the future. So there's all these different things that are cause and effect. And the universe is filled with cause and effect. From solar rays to sun explosions to galaxy formations, all of them have an effect that we see and had a preceding cause. The difficulty is a lot of times we don't know the preceding cause. I know how the leaf got into my hands. I went and picked it off the tree, but I don't know how this leaf unfurled. It might have been there when they planted it. They just planted the tree this year. I don't know where the tree came from. I don't know any of that information, but those all had direct causes prior to it getting into my yard. And we see this every day. It's a 100% true law. The law of causality, cause and effect. What we really want to know as we're dealing and searching for God, is there a being or is there something uncaused in this universe or outside of this universe? Is there something that's always existed? Time out of mind. Try to contemplate that as we go through the next video. Try to have your mind go back and contemplate eternal, uncaused existence, always existing, never not existing. My mind is just, I can't wrap. We like things that we can wrap our heads around, right? That we can kind of understand and get around. As we deal with these concepts of God and the greatest being, we're gonna come up against these walls, right? Come up against these big walls. Okay, to wrap things up, let's just cover those again. We have the law of mathematics, law of logic. We have two laws from experience. We have the law of death. These are things that can't be proved logically. They can be demonstrated like the law of causality, where every effect has a cause, and we can find that in experimentation, but it's also something we learn from experience. Before they calculated these things, they understood the law of cause and effect. These are the 6 things I would say that humans know with 100% certainty. If you want to put it at 99% certainty, I think most people would agree 99% certainty is something that we know. Why am I doing this? Because I'm building a case for knowledge. I'm building a case for what we can know and how can we reason to get an understanding of who God is. So we're going to use these tools. Now the question you have to ask is, are they valid? Are these 6 laws valid? And are these going to be enough to help us find God? I hope so. Hopefully I'll demonstrate some of that. But it's going to be really challenging as we think about and we go through this study, as we go through this search. But we need tools that are validated and trustworthy during our search for God. We need things that we know that we can trust and that we can use. And the primary thing we're going to use is logic. The next steps, now that we have these 6 tools, I'm going to go into each of these tools a little bit more in depth. You'll take your time and go through the full article on the law of identity. Go through the full article on the law of non-contradiction. But if you're comfortable with these 6 tools, if you feel like you really have a grasp and a handle on them, then I would recommend that you just go ahead and start going into that area of philosophy, which will be actually section 4 of the book that's on the website. That area will take a very interesting previous proof for God and turn it on its head, so that when we search for God, we're going to use those omni characteristics where it's all or nothing. I'll have some also some topic that I discuss on belief. Hopefully it'll be interesting. Hopefully you'll continue to join me. Thank you so much. Again, I'm Colon Wright. Peace. Shalom. God bless.